spy systems have at least a dual capability built into them. The ability to keep an eye on and gather information about the UFO presence. We are in for an extraordinary treat this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ron Regehr.
Morning, Bob. Good morning. First of all, I want to thank Bob and Terry for inviting me here, and most of all, thank you for being here, because I don't do good speaking to an empty room. Next slide, please. As we say, spy satellites, Earth's first defense against alien invasion. And as we said, I think the government has known about this at least since Roswell, if not before, and they've worked diligently to attempt to ascertain both the threat and the capability. This is my favorite quote. The world is divided into three groups of people: a very small group that makes things happen, a somewhat larger group that watches things happen, and a great multitude that never knows what has happened. What we want to do is raise you one step. Wherever you are today, raise you up one step. One of the first questions that comes to mind is, why would we build a UFO detector? As we said, the U.S. government, I believe, views the UFOs as potential threats. Project Blue Book said that the UFOs pose no threat to security of the United States. However, General Bollinger had a memo out that says, if there is a UFO that poses a threat, don't give it to Blue Book. So that sort of tells me somebody thought they were a threat. But we'll let this organization go on to work to alleviate the concerns of the public. How many people live here full-time in the hotel? Show of hands. Okay, I mean full-time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for all your life. Everybody else probably lives in a house or an apartment or on a big luxury yacht. And how many people locked their doors when they left? Now, why did you do that? You do that just because. And that's why the government builds a UFO detector. One of the reasons, just because. You don't want people walking through your house. We don't want people walking into our bedrooms. And we don't want aliens flying through the skies if we don't know about it. Another reason is there was a military threat that we had to concern ourselves with. And then there's the abduction scenario. So here's some reasons. We had the Roswell crash and recovery effort in 1947. We had the takeover of some B-29s when they were surveying the Arctic that Wendell Stevens can tell you about. We had the off-course or deflection of a Juno 2 rocket. We had disabling of nuclear warheads twice in Malmstrom Air Force Base. If that's not a threat, I don't know what is. We had an Atlas F ICBM that was destroyed by UFOs during a launch out of Vandenberg, documented on videotape by Dr. Jacobs. We had assaults on nuclear weapons storage depots, triggering systems, both here in the Soviet Union. And everybody knows that these darn things that we send out into space invariably get thumped and bumped and fall out of the way and don't make it. So we've lost a lot of space probes. Next slide, please. We had James Forrestal, Secretary of Defense, say, we're being invaded and we can't stop them. Next. General Douglas MacArthur, the nations of the world will have to unite. So the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of Earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets. It's 45 years ago he said that. People say, well, why don't they land on the White House lawn, for crying sakes? Well, I'm sorry for the quality, lack of saying. However, on 2 occasions in 1952, numerous UFOs flew over the White House. The CIA director was having a lawn party, and everybody's pointing up. They had radar observations. They launched fighters against them. And this happened 2 consecutive weekends. So what did they do? The Air Force convened the biggest press conference since the end of World War II to explain to the press who had seen these things, took pictures of them, that what you saw was a little problem with the radar, and the planet Venus, 7 planets all at once. It's amazing. And the press bought the story. Now, the spookier thing was that this was in the height of the Korean War. And so the biggest press conference in the middle of a war is about UFOs over Washington, D.C. Several months later, the NSA was formed in 1952 also. And that led to the development of many other programs. Secretary of Navy Daniel Kimball spotted a UFO. Here he is shown with Theodore Van Karman, founder of JPL, and a little obscure company called Aerojet. And as they say, we don't make arrows and we don't make jets. And Secretary Kimball and Theodore Van Karman worked for a long time in developing sensing devices for this little obscure company. And one of the things we used to do is we'd have Mikey come out with a thermometer, and the way you measure efficiency of rockets is to measure the heat of the exhaust plumes. And so in the early days, they weren't too powerful rockets. You get a guy on a probe to stick a radiometer into the exhaust, and yep, that sucker's hot. And that worked for a while, and then one day, things didn't work too well. We had a massive explosion, and 5 technicians turned into the atmosphere. I was in the 2nd story of the building. The building has no windows. It has a double 90-degree entryway to get into it, and that's the only windows in these doors. And on the 2nd story, I could still see the flash of the rocket going up, and we were burning about 2.5 cups of fuel. So I'll give you an idea of the energy contained in some of these exotic fuels. Former CIA director and Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter is ostensibly, depending on which way you want to believe, and I'm not going to try to convince you either way, head of MJ-12 or wrote the Eisenhower briefing documents. Not to get involved with that, he was involved in the UFO community for quite a while and was former director of the CIA. And he said, "It is time for the truth to be brought out. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. I urge immediate congressional action to reduce the dangers of secrecy about UFOs." Next slide, please. So there's a perceived threat, and threats come in 2 forms. One form of the threat is, if I've got a gun or a bomb or a stick, I could inflict harm on you. The other threat is, besides the capability, is my intentions. I mean, we know that Great Britain and France for years have had nuclear weapons, but we didn't look at them in the same kind of way as a threat as we did, let's say, the Soviet Union, because the inferences of their aggressive action weren't made manifest. So we're sitting here, they're not our enemies, so they're okay even though they can destroy us. Nobody cared too much about Jamaica attacking us. They had neither the capability nor the desire. So we have threats. Now here's something that's in my book, an article from the Soviet Military Review. It says, on August 25th, 1966, a U.S. Air Force officer working on a Minuteman missile in North Dakota thought his radio had stopped. He was 18 meters down in the concrete silo, and above the silo, at a height of 30 meters, there's a UFO. In the autumn of '74, a metal disc 100 meters across approached the South Korean anti-aircraft missile battery. They launched Hawk missiles against it. It was shot down by the UFO. The second ray disabled and melted the remaining Hawk batteries. I'm paraphrasing this, of course. Now, I don't know where you come from or what planet you live on, but where I come from, that's a threat. But we didn't hear about it from Dan Rather. We get it from the Soviet military review in 1989. They were still the bad guys then, unless my calendar's off. Next slide. Continue. This ballistic missile defense is designed to control outer space and destroy near-Earth and space targets. Hey, that's cool. Any system can be effective only if it is managed by super-quick computer systems. It is important here to correctly identify targets, so corresponding computer cells must know what signal characteristics the object is tracking. And this is important. We believe the lack of information on the characteristics and influence of UFOs increase the threat of incorrect identification. Then mass transition of UFOs along trajectories close to those of combat missiles could be regarded by computers as an attack. Next. In the autumn of 1960, all bombers at Travis Air Force Base were put on red alert for an attack. And suddenly the targets disappeared and were later explained as radar reflections off the moon. The Soviets buy that too. However, here's where we almost involved in another world war, and the Soviets are concerned about misidentifying UFOs with missiles. And they're concerned not only that we might attack them, but we might do it because we misidentified these things. So they're expressing what I believe is a legitimate concern on both sides of the fence, if you will. Nobody wants to either trigger an attack because of these things or misidentify and say, oh, it's just UFOs, and have New York City disappear. And the reason I show this is I believe there was a real threat from the beginning, and that what they did was they worked to ameliorate that by designing systems to detect these pesky little critters. So what we want to do is we want to sort of, as a collective group here, look at what we would do to design a UFO detector. Next slide. So first of all, we have to characterize the phenomenon. Now, they come in a lot of colors. I mean, there's red ones and blue ones and black ones and brown ones and green ones and yellow ones and orange ones. Sometimes they're detectable by radar, and sometimes they aren't. And they move at real high speeds, or they stop, or they hover. They're radioactive. In other words, they behave like a lot of things that you and I, next please, see every day. And so that makes it kind of easy for us in many respects. I'm sorry I got the exposure when I made the slide a little bit bad. Here's a pretty good picture of a UFO. It's three blue pulses there, and those are probably ionized air. And what happens is when you subject the air to intense radiation, it wants to break up its components and release energy and then give back energy, and it creates colors depending on the energy. This UFO was coming up the valley, 3 explosions, and then it made an abrupt 90-degree turn and went up. Here's a little bit closer view of it. Got my Jedi Knight lightsaber here. It's working. Yeah. But we can't see it on the screen, so much for high tech. We're going to call this yellow thing here, I believe that's the UFO, and it's got a plasma field around it. And so that's one of the better photographs of the plasma, the UFO, and the interaction of these devices. So there's some colors. I just wanted to throw in a color slide because in aerospace, whenever we get in trouble, we always throw in a color slide, and everybody says, oh, it forgets. Next slide, please. So we have this entire spectrum that we can look at, starting at one end on radio waves, we know what they are, and then these continue up to microwaves, like in your microwave oven, then the infrared region, which is heat sources, then our visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays, and it continues on both directions. So we really have no problems there. But we want to make sure that we cover those areas, thank you very much, that are of interest to us that may yield positive results. Next, please. So we look at the visible, infrared, ultraviolet. These are the detector options we have. The infrared is heat sources, as I say, and we can get a differential. It's not just heat that we want to look at. We want to look at differences in heat. We're not going to spot barbecues in fire pits, but we might spot a barbecue that's in the middle of a cold area, something like that. So infrared is a real handy technique to use, especially when we're talking about these things that travel through the atmosphere at high speed and get hull heating and a lot of radiation. Ultraviolet, that's really good because we're talking about plasmas, and ultraviolet is a result of plasma. Corona discharge is another one, lightning, the aurora borealis, power lines. But UFOs are going to give us a lot of UV. The drawback is we can't use the data for the most part because the atmosphere soaks up or attenuates the signal. And so about 10,000 feet and lower, where we really start to get interested in it, they disappear because the atmosphere just soaks up the signal. Nuclear radioactivity is another one that we can look at. We have a little problem there that it doesn't work too well from the standpoint of the energy doesn't radiate very far, and we don't know how to focus it without magnets and stuff. It's kind of rough. And radar is our last one. Next, please. We'll go into these a little bit more detail if you want to. Here's what I was talking about, the energy levels that we look at, and it explains maybe for the first time why the UFOs are different colors. Well, they're making plasma. Their energy is different, and if you notice the low energy down at the bottom right, the infrared, well, that'll be black almost maybe. And they're slow and they're hovering. They're black. We have the pictures of the red UFOs and, where they start to get a little more energetic. And then they go up blue, green, yellow, and then ultraviolet, which is an intense white, and they disappear with more energy because it's beyond our visible spectrum. However, this is only sensitive at a UV below 10,000 feet, and also the visible, so we can get some of the visibility. Next slide. Here's why we don't use radiation. You can see there, we get 10,000 electron volts. Electron particles are only going to go 41 meters. It's 120 feet. We're 22,000 miles up. So we're not going to see radiation. However, it's interesting to know that it's an option if we want to exercise it. Next, please. What affects how we work? Well, one of the things is cloud cover. And I don't know anybody here that can see through clouds. Neither can our satellites in the visible portion. IR suffers a little bit. Radar doesn't care. Another thing that affects us is sighting angle. How many here have looked at a sunrise or a sunset? Yeah. And you can see the sun because the atmosphere attenuates or soaks up that brightness, and it doesn't hurt our eyes. How many could comfortably look at high noon and when you're here in Laughlin it's the sun? You can't do that. You're only looking through 5 miles of atmosphere. You burn your retinas. So sighting angle is critical. As the satellite looks out from the center of its Earth, called the subpoint, more towards the horizon, we get less and less signal definition. Next thing that worries us is atmospheric characteristics. Not too much now, but if you drove here, or everybody's experienced driving in warm weather, and the atmosphere above the road sort of dances, those are air turbules. And just as you can't see down the road, we can't see for space when we look at these air turbules because they want to do the same thing to us. They want to distort and weave the signal. Remember the submarine movies where they say, well, okay, we're going to go hide in this inversion layer. Or if you live in L.A., there's always an inversion layer. Well, this is where the atmosphere is more dense. and it wants to trap and hold things. We think of air as this stuff, but it has varying densities, and these densities act as a lens and will change the way things look. The next variable we worry about is natural radiation, primarily from the Van Allen belts and cosmic rays. Cosmic rays and this radiation causes interference in our signal processing, and as a result of that, we tend to get errors introduced. Look at that, a water holder right there. And they cause us spurious signal returns, and we don't like that. So what we do is we put a little bit of shielding on it, but that's kind of heavy, and then we kick them up into higher orbit out of the range of the Van Allen belts. We have to do, after we get these things designed to get our detector elements, then we have to work on what are we going to do with it, and then that's where we get into our signal processing. So how many people look through binoculars? You know, the more powerful your binoculars, the more restricted your field of view. So that's optically correct no matter where we are. And so with satellites, we want to get as much magnification as possible without losing detail. A little visual aid here. Everybody can see this, I'm sure. There's a little device in here with 64 detectors in it. That's part of the eye of our spy satellite. So we've got detectors that small, which I don't think anybody can see. But you can check it out later with me. You've got a problem of magnifying that image they collect. And we do that with a 6-foot-long telescope. So the next thing we have to do, once we get the image up there, then we have to filter the noise from the real signal. Mothers know a lot more than us dads about signal filtering, because you can be involved in listening to the radio, talking to your neighbor, listening to the other kids running through the kitchen, and hear Junior, who just woke up 2 bedrooms away. And that's because you've trained your ears to listen for that. We could be in a cocktail party, chatter all around, and then we'll hear somebody say our name. So, oh, that's because we're filtering. Our minds work well doing that. So we want to try to do the same thing with our satellite signals. And then we have cables that stick to our feet. Then we have what we call smart signal processing. UFOs move, and they move really fast. And so we can use that to our advantage. So we have what we call moving target indicators. We get one data frame, compare it with the next data frame. Anything that's the same, the computer throws out. So if something's moved, we can see it. So we call that smart signal processing. The other thing we want to do is our eyes are very good at seeing details when we look straight ahead. But you can go like this. You can't see much details, but you can see movement. And so as scientists, we try to design the system that works for us, our vision, into our satellites. And so above the horizon, we're looking for things that move. But right down here, we're going to look at that real serious. So we design our sensor systems to emulate the human eye. So after we get these things built, then we go on to put them into orbit. That's what satellites do. Orbits are just a complicated way of throwing a rock hard enough so it doesn't fall down. So if you get a satellite and throw it hard enough, it'll go so far and then hit the ground. Throw a little bit further. If you throw it hard enough, it'll come all the way back and hit you in the head, theoretically. However, it's kind of low, and it's going to not do that very many times, so we want to get it up higher. So we use rockets to get them up higher. All we're doing is the same thing the caveman did. We're throwing rocks. We're just throwing them harder and higher. So the 3 types of orbits that we can throw rocks into are elliptical orbits, geosynchronous orbits, and it's an elliptical orbit, but it's a special one called a Molniya orbit, developed by the Soviet Union. The little box cameras that take pictures from 3 foot, 4 foot, beyond the mountains, those have a built-in camera lens that has a long depth of focus. And that's what we have on a Molniya. It doesn't work close to Earth, but boy, it gets out there maybe 150,000 miles, back into about 800 miles. Works real good. And the characteristics of the orbit make it less susceptible to enemy bad things. The other two are elliptical orbit. The limitation is the latitudinal limits. It goes around. You've seen the little S curve. Next slide, we'll show that. These little curves, it's not really bouncing up and down. It's going around, and the Earth rotates underneath it. And so this is one pass, and the next pass, and the next pass. But what happens is, it takes us 12 hours to go over the same spot twice. Unless we do some real expensive maneuvering. So that's good for low-down stuff. And by the way, the high part of the orbit is called the apogee. The low part is called the perigee. And I'll give you a little hint on how to remember those. I don't know Greek or Latin. So I remember apes, apogee. I want to keep apes a long ways away. And pears are those good little fruits I like to eat, so that's close. So the perigee is the close part of the orbit, and the apogee is the far part of the orbit. There'll be a quiz later. Next slide. However, a geosynchronous satellite has a field of view about like this. We can see almost the entire Earth disk at one time. All the time. 24 hours a day. You can't close the blinds. We're always looking at you. So that's what I think I would design as a primary UFO detector satellite. One that's always looking. You can't say, well, it's not going to be here for another 15 minutes. We can do whatever we want. We want to have something that's looking all the time and on duty, and it's not going to fall asleep on us. The other characteristics of these things is they're right over the equator, which makes it real nice because we don't have too many threats coming out of Antarctica. We don't have too many threats coming from Canada, although they come over the horizon, so we build that. So a geosynchronous satellite, I believe, is the way to go. Next slide, please. This gives me an opportunity to get a drink. After we get our satellite, then we have to gather the data and do something with it. That makes sense, but I like to sort of go through the steps we go through in working on this. So we have to get receiving stations. Then we have to prepare databases, establish templates. Next slide. Keep the data that matches the templates and throw out the stuff that isn't. And here's a couple of templates I prepared. The one on the left shows the intensity of the signal on the left-hand side, and the time that we have the signal on the bottom goes to the right. Now, everybody's lit a flash bulb, and you get a lot of light real fast, and then it fades out real quick. You light a match, and you get a little peak, and it burns for a long time. Now, we might have the same amount of energy in both the flashlight and the flash bulb, the match, as demonstrated by the area underneath the curve. So, but it's radically different in how that energy is dissipated. The same thing is true of missiles, UFOs. So if we could get enough of these time intensity profiles, as these are called, and then we can say, oh, if it's following this curve, it's probably an Atlas, or it's probably the mothership, or whatever, because we've gathered enough data, we've got ground correlation, and we can then put this into our computer and get an automatic recognition. And that's what we've done. Next. This was the first unclassified notice that I was aware of where we had trainable software now. We've had this in the industry for quite a while. But this was in April of '98 that we finally got some trainable software where the software will educate itself, and we don't need intervention by an operator. And what it does is we can say, with a light pin, that's what they're doing here, circling, where it says jar tool 2, they're circling an area of the film, and or the image, and they're saying, computer, when you see something that looks like this, let us know, and then the computer will search through it, and then it'll upgrade the database continuously without intervention. Next, please. So we've got our satellites built. Now, what do we have in the inventory? Well, we have early satellites were the Corona series, or KH, which stands for keyhole. And those were the ones that I was enthralled in the early days watching the flying boxcar with the big snags catching the film canisters. Those were supposed to be Explorer 1s. Remember the old Explorer? Scientific satellites. They were spy satellites. Now, we knew it, and Soviet intelligence knew it, we the people in the industry, but everybody else thought we were getting scientific data. And it was great because we'd try to snag them, and we'd have two planes that tried to snag these things. And then the Soviets would have a plane underneath if we missed them. And then we had a little device that would explode an explosive on the parachute to let them drop. Then we had destroyers that would try to pick them up, but the Soviets had destroyers to pick them up. And then we had submarines under that, and I guess the Soviets had submarines too. It was great, a lot of fun. But it wasn't too good for gathering intelligence. You ruin the film when you get it wet. And besides, they only saw houses, but it was a hot number for the day. It was sort of like the little, what was that game? Pong, the computer game. And then we go on the next generation keyhole satellites. They're also in elliptical orbit. That's the third column over shows you then the keyhole 9. Now we could vary that orbit, and when we could do that, what that does for us is enables us to extend the life of the satellite by bringing it up higher as the atmosphere drags it down. And then we go on to some of these other ones that are even more exotic. And down here is the first one that I think was highly successful in viewing the entire Earth's disk, the DSP. Then we have some civilian satellites down at the bottom, Spot and Goes. Those are the ones that you see almost all your images from, that and Landsat. And we'll go into a little bit more on some of these. Next slide, please. Here's a drawing of that really pretty DSP satellite that you saw right at the very first. And we have bang meters, we have extra high frequency antennas, laser crosslinks, star sensors, XDS detectors, Earth sensors, flash meters, ABLs, special events, sun sensors, and X-ray detectors. Now, why do we have all these things? Various types of sensors are used on our surveillance satellites. Each is needed to detect a specific area of the spectrum. So just like we need AM radios and FM radios and VHF television and UHF television and blue blocker sunglasses, satellites, those are all different frequencies we're watching or listening to. Our satellites need these different frequencies. But it doesn't stop there. We have Earth sensors, star sensors, all these different sensors to pick up data to gather the intelligence so we can find out what we're looking at. And that sketch shows some of the sensors used on the satellites. Now, this satellite, by the way, detected every single Scud launch during the Gulf War. So what do we see? We see slow walkers. We see fast walkers. We see valid IR sources. Boy, that one clears it up for us. And we see what are called unidentified objects. Now, we're going to show a video in just a minute. What we need to do for the video is we need to turn off the slide projector, get the slide projector off the table, and then they start the video. So while we're going through that, if Sarah, gentlemen, could help Elaine move that slide projector down. Or you got it? Oh, she's got it. So just as a slow walker probably doesn't talk about the geriatric perambulations of older people walking through the mountains, fast walkers probably don't talk about the fast runners in the Olympic fast walking contest. So without too much more, could we have the number one video, the first video, please?
Back on 14 days, and they didn't do it. And I don't know if you have seen this one. We have the satellite. Do you see that? The same sphere, huh? The same, coming from out, you see, observing and leaving. Is that a satellite? Is that space trash? You see, it's coming from very far, stops, make a turn, and then 7 years later, the other video is from 1984, and this one is from 1991. Observe, this is the Atlantis. This is being recorded from the Atlantis mission, the shuttle. Observe. The same spheres, huh? They are out in the space, they are here, they are in Mexico, they are in Phoenix, they are the spheres. You see, that's not for me, this is devastating. This
Okay,
is one of the best evidence
into the video.
I have ever seen. This is recorded from the space. This is official. And we have this thing coming.
Yeah,
before
stop
you.
the video. And come up with the house lights, and we're ready to go with the slides again. Thanks to Jaime Masson for presenting us, for allowing me to use that video. I don't know where he got the footage, but I believe it's legitimate. Security regulations preclude me from telling you what these things are precisely. However, if we go to the next slide, we'll see that Jacques Vallée, I think most of you have heard of him, in his novel Fast Walker, defines a fast walker in the jargon of scientific intelligence, a source of electromagnetic radiation moving at high speed in the outer layers of the atmosphere, which triggers the sensors of spy satellites. Now, I can neither confirm nor deny that definition. But I'll let Jacques swear by it. And I think the video kind of shows that. Now, we have 4 DSP satellites right now, and those are the locations. And that came out of Satellite Times, in case anybody here wants to get me violating security. Now, what these locations do for us, though, and I don't have a chalkboard. I like to draw pictures when I talk. So everybody sort of have a mental image of the Earth. You know, the whole world in his hands. And then out here's a satellite, and then up here's a satellite, and down here's a satellite, and what that gives us is stereo vision. So now we have at least 2 satellites looking at every portion of the Earth disk all the time, which means we have great correlation for not only location, but importantly and critically, elevation. How high up are they? You can't do that just with one satellite, just like you can't get depth perception with one eye. You can't get the stereo sound with one speaker. So we need different satellites. Next, please. Now, everybody's been wondering, okay, we get through all this crap. When's he going to talk about this stuff? Okay, has the DSP detected satellites? Yes, but we're going to not get there yet. We detected 166 out of the 166 surface-to-air missiles in the Iran-Iraq War. Real low-intensity targets. We detected all the Scuds. Remember Wolf Blitzer? God's what a name for a correspondent. Wolf Blitzer. During the Gulf War. And they'd say, well, we have another missile coming in to us, and it's going to impact in approximately 15 minutes. And sure enough, 15 minutes later, there'd be a big boom. And what was happening was our satellite would detect the launch of the Scud, determine its launch coordinates, where's it going, and then relay the information to NORAD and Cheyenne Mountain. Cheyenne Mountain would confirm it, and this is where it gets scary. Pick up the telephone, same AT&T line that you and I work with, and call the area commander in either Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, or Israel, and then he'd pick up the telephone and call the battery commander of the Patriot missile system, and he got to use a radio, and he'd call the other guys, and that's the system that worked during the Gulf War. Trust me, we've changed it since then. 3 times we detected sentient life forms entering Earth's atmosphere from deep space, and I worked on that program. It was Saturn Apollo. We got all of the Apollo missions. We detected those with our spy satellites. And we detect meteoroids with great regularity. Next, please. One of the earliest confirmations I had of DSP working in something other than regular missile detection was I used to write what we call the 60-day reports. Every 60 days we have to write this voluminous report to the government telling what we've done in the last 2 months with their money. And I wrote this report, and I'd send them out every 60 days. And then one day I got this slide back. The next slide. I'll read that first one to you. But I got this slide in the mail, or excuse me, on a fax from John Stafula. Excuse me? And the next one, please. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was shocked when I got this fax because that page out of my report was classified secret, and this yahoo back in New Jersey is faxing it to me. So it's 9 o'clock at night. I don't have a security container. I'm not an approved government facility, so I put it in a paper bag underneath my pillow. It worked for me. And the next day, I go into security, and I say, look what I got in the fax. And they go, well, what is it? And so I had to take them down to the vault, pull the document, show them the document, and then they started to charge me for violating security. I didn't protect it. And so as they started the investigation, I said, wait a minute, you're trying to shoot the messenger here. And I said, I'm not going to have any part of this. I got up and left, which they didn't like. But left, not only left the office, I left the plant. The next day I came in, the guard says, what did you do? What did you do? Well, I thought maybe I was fired or something. Turned out the guy that was investigating me for this had been terminated. But what this shows is, let me read the previous slide. Just leave that one up. I have information that at 11:26 Zulu, 5 May 1984, DSP platform detected an object with heat in the 9,000 kilowatts per steradian range. That's technical talk for the suckers hot. Coming out of deep space and passing within 3 kilometers of the sensor. That's close. Its star tracking telescope first detected the object by tracking the position. The observation lasted 9 minutes. The detailed explanation failed to explain what caused this other than a real object. And then he asked me, do they have this capability? And then he tells me fast walker, which was a term that I knew was classified. He's got that. And they said they get 2 or 3 of these a month. And then he tells me something that's very compelling, and I want you to realize this, that the government doesn't care unless it's a threat. They're not going to spend money or resources to look at these. Which is why when you ask the government about a lot of things, the vast majority of them are at the bottom of the quote. They don't know what's happening. And so they're not a threat to them, so they don't do anything with them. And it's disturbing. Next one. Next slide. Have we detected UFOs? Well, we have the Iranian UFO. This is a slide from a report I prepared, and I obtained this via the Freedom of Information Act, and this, along with several pages of sighting events, are in my book that I'll have outside later on. But this one right here, this sighting, 238 scans, possible SR, that's a classified term, but make up something and that's the Iranian UFO. And we're going to see a little video in just a minute, but I want to read a little bit about this. It comes from the 1978 Air Force Journal. It's also included in my book. I put the whole article in there. It's called about now you see it, and now you don't. Quote, these unidentified flying objects were described as bird-like or brightly lit helicopters, although none were airborne at the time. Unable to convince the callers, just leave the previous slide up, Don. We'll just go, not use this one. That they were only seeing stars, the senior officer went outside to see for himself. They scrambled fighter planes and they had some real problems. And that's the subject of the next video. It's about a 15-minute video. It's not as short as the last one. And so I want to show you that because, to me, this is one of the best documented and best multiple witness UFO events that I'm aware of. If anybody knows of a better one, please let me know. So let's run video 2, please.
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. Now, Sightings goes inside Iran and uncovers the truth about a mass UFO encounter in 1976. You will hear from an Imperial Iranian Air Force general, a pilot, and an air traffic controller who have remained silent for more than 15 years. And you will actually see those people play themselves in a unique documentary.
At the beginning, we thought a rocket are coming.
All of a sudden, I see this flying object just going round and round and round and going up and up and up. And I told my mom, I said, Mom, I just saw a flying saucer. I saw a UFO.
I was going to prepare myself to shoot it down.
It was seen by civilians, pilots, generals, and the unerring eye of Air Force radar. Reports ricocheted from the Shah to President Ford and back again. The film that you're watching recreates the day's events with the actual military personnel who witnessed the most compelling UFO encounter Sightings has ever investigated. This film, seen here for the first time outside of Iran, was produced by the government and, in a bizarre twist of fate, would one day be used by the Ayatollah Khomeini to discredit the Shah.
When I saw this object is flying that fast, then I thought this is not a helicopter and this is not an aircraft. By that time I said, oh, should be some kind of UFO.
Radar readings taken inside the control tower at Mehrabad Air Force Base indicated the object was at least as large as a Boeing 707 tanker. The situation was serious. Brigadier General Nader Yousefi, base operations commander and the number 3 man in the Iranian Air Force, was notified immediately.
So I picked up the phone, and it was the base commander. He wanted me to know they are going to have the airplanes to take off from his base for the scramble mission.
General Yousefi authorized an immediate scramble mission. An Iranian Air Force F-4 Phantom jet fighter was ordered to engage the UFO and determine what it was. The F-4 approached Mach 1 in its pursuit of the UFO. At an altitude of 23,000 feet, the lead pilot reported in that he clearly saw a brilliant object 75 miles ahead of him. His actual radio transmissions are heard here publicly for the first time outside Iran. The F-4 was closing fast, but when the pilot got within 10 miles of the UFO, all onboard instruments failed. The F-4 retreated and then came in for a second pass. Again, the instruments failed. It was as if an electromagnetic force field was repelling the jet fighter. The pilots never got closer than 7 miles before they were forced to retreat.
It may suggest a deliberate kind of control mechanism, perhaps from the phenomenon to the airplane system itself, such that when the airplane is no longer a threat, it can change the radiation or whatever the energy is, whatever the effect is, and so that the systems on board the airplane come back to normal.
I put down my phone and I run to my balcony to see if I can see that object. I saw a big star among the other stars, which was at least twice as large as the normal star. I asked the tar what happened, and he said he lost communication again.
General Yousefi ordered a second F-4 to engage the UFO. The lead pilot was Iran's #1 top gun, Major Hussein Jafari.
It was around 12 miles, we lost communication. And I heard nothing from the pilots. So I was so scared what's going to happen and what happened to the pilots.
When the F-4 retreated, communication was inexplicably restored.
So I asked from the tower controller to tell them to continue their mission and see if they can get more information from the line up.
Then Major Joffrey nervously reported that a smaller UFO had emerged from the larger one and was trying to engage him.
And it was coming toward them. They tried to shut him down. When they squeezed the trigger, it didn't work, and the trigger was inoperative. They couldn't shoot the missiles.
The pilots, fearing for their lives, tried to eject, but the eject button jammed. Every backup system was inoperable.
We understood that the eject instrument also didn't work. So, in this case, I said to God, oh, God, save them.
The F-4 had no choice but to go into a negative G-force dive to escape this seemingly hostile UFO. When the fighter jet was 10 miles away from the larger UFO, the smaller craft flew off, and all onboard communication and instrumentation was restored to the F-4. Major Joffrey reported that the smaller UFO appeared to be landing on a mountaintop just southeast of Tehran. This landing was confirmed on the radar by the control tower. Brigadier General Yousefi witnessed it from his balcony.
He went down and landed on the ground. And now it is a communication between the mother ship and that small flying object. And it shows the lights between those two. It's connected. While they were landing, the tower was screaming on the phone to me, General, this flying object is following them and is going to land in Mehrabad. It's going to, it is in the short final, and I see a big, big light with the glaring red, blue, and yellow lights.
The so-called mothership tailed the F-4 into Mehrabad Air Force Base and flew low over the runway. As it performed what was described as a low-altitude flyby, power at the Air Force Base went out.
That was strange for us, and we asked each other why the power went out for some seconds.
Frankly, I don't have any explanation for that, but I will say that there are other cases, well documented, where power has been disrupted on the ground over fairly large areas during UFO presence.
After the flyby, the craft roared off toward the west, as if to say, mission accomplished. Search parties were dispatched to the supposed landing site of the smaller UFO, while the tower tried to track the outbound mothership. It was spotted 25 minutes later over the Mediterranean by an Egyptian Air Force pilot. A report sightings was able to confirm with the Egyptian embassy. Then, over Lisbon, Portugal, the pilot, crew, and passengers of a KLM Airlines flight reported seeing the UFO as it sped westward to the Atlantic. That was the last sighting we know of to date.
When Sightings continues, part 2 of our UFO investigation, a cover-up went to the highest levels of the Iranian government, and some say Washington knew everything.
The American people deserve to know what happened.
There's more.
When the pilots who had encountered a UFO over Tehran returned home, their ordeal was only beginning. They were shocked to see how their UFO confrontation was being distorted and trivialized by military-controlled press.
We knew the capability of the other countries and their airplanes' capabilities. It could be a spy airplane. I really have no idea, but maybe from some other war.
The day after the otherworldly encounter over Tehran, it was front-page news in both the Farsi and English-speaking newspapers throughout Iran. At the same time, Iranian and U.S. officials were meeting behind closed doors.
This particular case is interesting from another standpoint, and that is the involvement of the American government.
General Sabahat, now in exile in California, was the vice commander of the 2nd Tactical Fighter Base. He told Sightings that the day after the UFO event, he attended a top-secret meeting between the Imperial Iranian Air Force and the U.S. Air Force.
General Secord, which was the head of the U.S. Air Force in our Air Force, probably commander, commanding officer, and the operation, pilot, approach control of civil aviation.
Hussein Parouzi, an air traffic controller at Mehrabad Air Force Base, was also present at that meeting.
When they heard our report and the report of the pilot, they concluded that no country is able to have such a technology. And all of them believed it should be a strange object from outer space.
I collected the reports and I made my own observations as a report to my higher echelon, and we sent this report through the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Shah's intention.
They collect all of those information and send it to the United States by General Secord, because he was the head of the U.S. Air Force in our country.
The secret meetings continued, and rumors of a calculated disinformation program seemed to be borne out by the changing face of Tehran newspaper headlines. Day 1. Day 2. Day 3. Day 4. On day 5, the press reports the entire incident is a hoax.
I don't know why the appropriate authority prohibited me to interview with the press or news reporter. I don't know why this information is prohibited from the public.
Somehow the government doesn't want to open up to the public. I don't know why, but...
Despite media dismissals of the event as a joke, our sources report that a full-scale military investigation continued to search for answers.
I asked from the pilot of the F-4 to go and to look after that flying object. He knew where it landed. And when they flew and the Army personnel, they were in the area, they couldn't see anything.
The general who headed that search still lives in Tehran and denied repeated requests for an interview. But others who were present told sightings that no physical evidence of a UFO was found on the mountaintop where so many had reported seeing a small craft landing. However, for the first 3 days after the incident, there were serious electronic anomalies in the area.
The beeping sound that was picked up could be one of a number of things. It might be technology. In fact, depending on the frequency stability and interfrequency pulse and other factors like that, it very likely is a technology of some sort, as opposed to a natural phenomenon.
And then there is this. An American Defense Systems Program satellite operated by the U.S. Defense Department picked up signals from an unidentifiable technology on the same night the Iranian Air Force was scrambling over Tehran. Experts from DSP are revealing this information for the first time.
We saw something.
The DSP satellite is, in fact, a spy satellite that monitors airspace in military hotspots. On the night of September 19, 1976, the satellite was scanning the skies over Tehran.
That's an independent confirmation that an event of some type occurred at that time and place. What it was, we don't know.
Sightings asked the experts to explain the meaning of 238 scans, possible SR, but they told us that information was top secret.
Right now, all we can do is say, yes, there was something there.
Certain agencies, including the CIA, have gone on record as having information on this particular case.
In fact, Sightings has obtained these documents from the United States Air Force Security Service that confirm our government's involvement in the UFO investigation. And, according to this Washington Post article, the investigation was still in full force as late as 1979.
Now, what does that say? It says that somebody thought this case was very, very important when it happened. Why, after this many years, that's still important, I think is a fundamental question. And the American people deserve to know what happened.
Dr. Richard Haynes continues to investigate pilot UFO confrontations as part of his own Project Delta. For the past 30 years, Dr. Haynes has interviewed more than 100 civilian and military pilots who claim to have encountered UFOs.
Eight hours of interview with sightings crew